There we go. I hate that sound. I wish I could change her volume or her accent. I want her to have an accent. So,
Uh,
all right. Well, m- let's see how we want to do this. Here we go. The Matthew Paul Turner. See, when you put a "the" in front of it, it makes it something special.
yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it does. It could also make it something, another kind of something.
Well, like the Ohio State University,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yes.
Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on in the evening. I know evenings are not always convenient, um, but it seems to be the best for me after I'm able to put my
Hey, you
kids
know
to
what?
sleep.
You have to record when it is convenient, and I am happy to be here.
Yeah. So, one of the questions I like to ask in the most existential way possible, because that way you can do whatever you want with it, is when you try to explain like what a Matthew Paul Turner is, like what is that?
What is a Matthew
Yeah,
Paul Turner?
what is AU? Yeah, there we that's a horrible sentence.
um, I I'm a dad who writes books about God, I guess is, yeah. I mean, I guess that would be the cleanest, the easiest version of that.
Fair enough.
Probably
Best
not necessarily the most interesting, but yeah, no, that's
No, it is what it is. That is my most favorite way to ask that question. In the day job, I'll also ask questions in the very similar way, and it's
yeah.
fun to watch clients go,
What exactly are you talking about?
"Yeah, yeah." Um, yeah, so so I work at a bank, and so like when business owners will come in or whatever, I'll ask them questions about their business in a very similar way, and they'll go, "I've never thought about that." I was like, "Well, that matters. Like, why do you
Yeah.
even do this? Like, why did you obviously are not happy. You're not saying that you aren't, but like the client or whatever, like,
Right, right, right.
why are we even here? Why don't we just shut it all down?" Um, so anyway, so tell me a bit about you,
Okay.
in a more general sense. So kind of what is how does one get in to writing children's books about God? Because it's not a massive genre, at least not one that I've ever purchased. Most of
Hmm.
my children's books came from the Dolly Parton Imagination Library,
Yeah.
and so I'm very thankful
I
for those. They're fun.
I love that library, or I
Oh
love
yeah,
that nonprofit.
yeah.
Um, I my ex-wife told me many times as I was reading to my children, that I should write a children's book,
Mm,
um, and it was and that was basically built on the idea that I was a writer. I wrote books for adults, nonfiction, memoirs and stuff, and she knew that I also had this gift for um, making silly songs that rhyme for people's birthdays and things like that. That's something that I mean, rhyming had been something that I was doing since I was like 13, carrying around a notebook.
mm,
Um, and so when I started writing children, or when I started reading children's books about faith or God to my kids, anytime I would like pull one out that, it would be like the fourth or fifth at bedtime, and we'd read, all the ones that they liked, and then I'd pull one from the pile and try to read it. And I would almost always find myself like either skipping pages
mhm,
or like changing the narrative a little bit
mhm,
to protect them from some of the ideas that the books were, putting forth. And I just thought it was one of those things where, I was just cocky enough to think maybe there's a chance that I could potentially fill a need here, um, because I wanted to introduce my kids to God in a different way than
mm,
how I was introduced to God. And so my very first book was, because we ended up self-publishing my first children's book,
I didn't know
and it
that.
was it was When God Made Light.
Mhm,
And I started like playing with this. First off, I wrote a whole bunch of terrible rhymes about God, and it was, like, just they were just awful things. And finally I got this idea about light, and I started playing with this concept of what it would look like, or what how could I describe light coming to an existence in that very first moment. What would that look like? And so I started playing with this idea, and then I kind of moved into how we interact with light during the day and how we interact with light during at night, and the light that's inside us, and that we are, a part, or that we are the salt and light. And so like this idea that we could be light, kind of just like it turned into this really beautiful, like fun narrative of rhyming that all dealt with the light of God. And I sent it. I sent it off to my agent, and my agent was like, "This is really good, Matthew, but I don't necessarily do children's books, but I'll send it out there." Well, he did send it out there, and we got 11 no's.
11.
And like 11, because and one of those 11 no's came back twice and said no. And so
Did they forget they said no once, or did
oh
you email
no,
them
no.
twice?
The one person on the team really wanted to sign
Yeah.
me, but like I got asked if I could write under like a pseudonym. I got asked if I could, like, could we put your wife's name on the book instead of your name, because like I at the time was writing a blog called Jesus Needs New PR.
Mm.
And so I had a little bit of a reputation in the Christian space for that didn't sit well with a lot of the faith publishing, faith publishers. And so we self-published it, and we printed 5,000 copies, and we ended up selling 4,800 of them. And one of those publishers, and it was actually the one that said no twice, came back and said, let's do this. And in the meantime, I had already started writing When God Made You, which ultimately became the first book that I released. And I mean, I hoped that the book would connect with people. I had no idea that it would connect with so many people, and continue to connect with people. And it was a wonderful, like I thoroughly enjoy writing prose for children, because I think that if for all of the people who are deconstructing, I like to think that maybe we can give our kids something different that works for them, that they don't have to then recover from 20, 25, 30 years down the road.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Our church gives out your last book. I can't remember the event.
What is God Like? That one?
No, When God Made You. No, hold on. Yeah, When God Made You. It's upstairs. Okay. So the reason I remember that, and so I had forgotten that we do this, and so they give it out. It's either I feel like it's at baby dedications, and it's like given to the parents with the intention of eventually you're going to read to these kids. We like this book. Read this one to them. I don't remember if that's when it is. It could be when they get a little bit older, but it's an event, and the kids every child in the church gets one as they age into that, which is cool. But when this book came from your publisher, like my daughters lit up. They're like, we know his name, and they literally went over to the shelf and they grabbed it back down.
Oh,
and I was like, she's like, can we read it? I'm like, sure, let's read it. I was like, do you want to read the new one? They're like, no, let's read this other one, because they like.
Yeah, so. It's new things are, that's weird.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the way that you write about God is good, because I will say I also have many of those other books that you read to your kids at bedtime, or even really just at any time, and I found myself filtering everything in the Old Testament, many of the things in the New Testament, where I'm like, well, that's not even what that says. And that's based on a bad translation of that word. Like, if the Bible is always translated with a bias, but this children's book is beyond bias. This children's book is just propaganda.
And they try to like hide it under this, like, not even a cute, not even cute imagery, but like, just they try to hide it under some sort of imagery.
Mhm.
that I'm like, kids can see through some of that stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
it's, but depending on their age and whatnot. But I'm also like big on like not putting a pronoun on God. And like, I just, I don't want my kids to instantly think of a white male, like
Yeah.
when they think about the deity. And so like the only time I have used a pronoun in a book for God was for the book that I finished for Rachel Held Evans. And and that was because Rachel had used all of the pronouns, he, she, and they, in reference to God in a couple little parts of her book. And I honored that creativity. And but for my own books, I try to avoid,
Yeah.
I always avoid the pronouns, because I think that it's just I don't know, I think when you can, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorites is I tell the Jonah story, or not the Jonah, the Jonah story the same way every time to my kids,
Uh-huh.
in the children's version of the Bible story. So when
Yeah.
we would go through, I would use the pictures, but I would literally retell the Jonah
Retell
story, um,
yeah.
in a different way, more about though, like we all get asked to do things we don't want to do. And when you stop fighting, things happen, and it's okay that people that you don't think should be forgiven get to still get forgiven, even when you think they shouldn't be. Is
Yeah.
effectively the way that I tell that story, which
Hmm.
is kind of Jonah, but not all of Jonah. But that's not
Yeah.
what's in the books. And so as my kids got older, and I say it the same way every time, and they can read the words, they're like, "That's not what it says." I'm like, well, we're done with this book then. This book is done. um, we're
Yeah, when you start to read, it's like when it's like the bad words.
yeah,
As soon as you can no longer spell shit, like
yeah.
and without them knowing it, like yeah, it's
Yeah, this book is done. Um, yeah, we were reading the Chronicles of Narnia recently. My daughter and I, not the I think we're on Prince Caspian, and it talks about some queer folk,
Mhm.
and she is used to that word in a different way because she's in
Sure.
fourth grade, and there's conversations about that, especially recently with all of the laws. And we live in Virginia, and we decided to, when they said that we could, ban people. And anyway, it's not why you're here, but either way, she's like, "That's
Yeah.
not what that word means." I'm like, "No, yes." That's words change. Baby, I
Yeah.
don't understand. I can't explain linguistics to you at 8 o'clock at night. That's not the
Yeah.
time to do linguistics. So getting to this book, where did I Am God's Dream come from?
Um. Well, there's a line in When God Made You at the very end that where I say, "You being you is God's dream coming true." And I've had a lot of people, a lot of more conservative people complain about that, like
Mm,
in the sense of like, God doesn't dream, or how we aren't God's dream. Like it's very much like that. For some reason, that line hits them in a negative way.
mm.
And so in the very beginning, it kind of started out as a way to, well, if that line ticks you off, I'm going to write a whole book all about being God's dream. And I think that it turned into, like, it was my very I'd always wanted to write a children's book in first person, because I wanted to give children a way of expressing faith in their in that they can own, or that they can kind of have um, ownership over the ideas. And I just think that when you put an I in front of something and you say, "I am this," there's power in that.
Mm,
And I wanted to give them, instead of it being, "You are this," I wanted them to be able to say, I love myself because of this. When I look in the mirror, I see who God sees. And so so that's um, definitely something that I wanted to explore. But then, I recently had uh, a big event in my own life where my wife and I, separated, and I actually came out as gay. and
mhm.
and so this book really is a little bit of a book to myself. I mean, it's a celebration of of what I want my kids to know about them, but also it was kind of me talking to the inner child of my own person, and reminding myself of what does it mean to be God's dream, to be a one kid parade, to be seen as wonderfully made. And so I split the book in my own head. I don't know if this isn't like something that like is put in the text, but like in my own head, it's split up into this idea of body, mind, and body, mind, and emotions, and then soul. And so it was I wanted to reflect the idea of what can I give kids, what words can I give kids that would give them confidence, allow them to see God in a way that is positive, that is like encouraging, that is affirming to them, that they can speak these words over themselves, and hopefully at some point maybe it sinks in and they become it becomes a part of their language. And so yeah, like and I this book is definitely, there's a couple places that that probably goes a little too deep for a child in some cases, but it's I told my editors came back and they were like they wanted to change, you know, a couple different words in the book. And you know, I it was the very first time after I've written, this is my 7th children's book, and I finally, for the first time, I said, you know what, no, I'm gonna keep it. And it's one of the words was transcend. And I know that that's a complicated word, and it's a word that, you know, people of faith have issue with. But when it comes to what I think about my own life and having to, on a daily basis, like my middle child, my daughter came home from school today, you know, talking about like, you know, how did she put it? Something like, my circle of friends is having a problem, Dad. So,
all of them.
Yeah. And so she started to express these thoughts of what was going on at school between her and her friends. And I said, you know, it was, our whole conversation was about her having to transcend that experience, that, you know, those words and those thoughts that were put onto her, and, you know, push through. And so I that's why I kept it. And so I think that there's some big ideas or big thoughts in this book, but I'm hopeful that it provides parents with a really good jumping off points to start conversations about you know, about body image, and about the emotions that we feel, and how all of the things that we are as people, there are glimpses of God that we can find in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I read it, I'm going to keep referencing my 6-year-old because she's smarter than me. I genuinely think that she just doesn't have the vocabulary or the rest of like,
Yeah.
she's freaking brilliant.
Yeah.
So I gave her the book. She's read it a couple times by herself. And I told her last night, I said, hey, so I'm going to talk to the guy that wrote this book, which she thought was cool. Everyone else she doesn't care about. You're the only guest. And I said, well, tell me what your favorite page is. And she gave me 2 pages. And so just curious your thoughts on that. But I asked her why. And then she had a really random question that I told her that I would ask.
Okay.
I'll ask that first, actually. So the bold letters, she started writing them down. And she's like, do they make one big sentence if I write them all down? To which I said, I have no idea. Probably not, baby. It probably just looked good on the page, but I will ask him.
Like, tell her that I could kick myself now, because that is a really beautiful idea. I wish I could. I wish we could go back and change that. But no, they don't. They
enough.
are somebody who is in charge of type treatment chose those
Did that.
words
Fair
too.
enough.
Yeah, and so yeah,
That's what I told her. I was like, it probably just looks good on the page. It balances out the pictures. He just
right.
wrote the words. And she's like, I bet they make a sentence. And so there's these massive, like 2-inch, the way that a 6-year-old writes
Yeah,
words. And I'm like, stop it. I'll just ask him. But her favorite page though, and I'll read this to you if it's all right,
for sure.
there's no page number. So it says, this body is mine and I'll treat it so kind. I'll value and love what I know God designed, because God made me me. And when she reads it out loud, that sentence she actually struggles with, because I don't think
Hmm.
she understands the grammar,
Yeah,
which is fine. And so that was good because she
God
asked
made me
what the
me.
yeah, yeah. She
Yeah.
asked what it meant. And then, and one day you'll see the dream about God's dreaming. That's who I will be. She wouldn't tell me why it's her favorite page. I don't know if she has the words to say so.
Yeah.
She's adamant that it is. You have any thoughts about just that page specifically?
Well, I think that we live in a faith world that has spent a lot of time criticizing the body. We talk about the body of Christ, but like as far as our bodies, and how we think about our bodies, how the idea that our bodies can get us into trouble. And I wanted to create these words, or this prose that really celebrated the body, no matter what the individual looks like, or how they move around, I wanted to celebrate the human body.
Mhm.
And I think that when I wrote the phrase God made me me, I mean, like, if I'm honest, Seth, I was writing that for myself. Like, I was
Mhm.
really writing that out of my own story,
Mhm.
and hoping that it translated to somebody else's story,
Mhm.
so they can connect the dots that God made them,
Yeah.
and they and that the light that is inside is going to shine, if we allow it to, if we
Mhm.
give it permission to,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so to speak. And so yeah, no, I that those that little section of the book, that specifically, believe maybe the page prior to it, that book, that was some of the very first things that I wrote, because I was really focusing on this whole, like, wanting to create this silly prose about how somebody feels inside their own skin,
Mhm.
and when that they liked their belly, that they
Mhm.
liked the way their hair did all went sideways, and they just liked themselves
Mhm.
because they were themselves, that wasn't because of something, or it wasn't because it was perfect or not perfect, it was because it was them.
Yeah.
And so this idea of empowerment, finding empowerment, that God made me me.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of, I think hopefully parents and kids will find a lot of power in that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. As I've read the book, I've read it for myself, and then I've read it through the eyes of my kids as I watch them read it. Um, one last little comment on one of your lines, and then I'll pivot.
Mhm.
You have a section here that says, and it's where they're in this like community garden thing, which is cool that it's even a community garden, or maybe this is a school garden. I don't know. You didn't
It's a
draw the
community garden.
you
Yeah.
didn't draw the
I didn't draw
pictures.
the pictures, but I did help with the idea.
Yeah.
So
So there's a part there that says dramatic, which is bold, and so she
mhm.
yells it,
Yeah.
and clever, but neat, hardly ever. Which
Yeah.
she literally said, she's like, "That is me.
Yes.
That's me." And I had to agree. I was like, 100%. That is,
Yeah.
you're the messiest, loudest,
Yeah.
smartest person I've ever met. Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like children's books should be required reading, whether or not you have kids for adults?
I think some do. I think some are really, really wonderful ways of, like, expressing ideas and mysteries that we still kind of, even as adults, don't fully grasp. It's like, I know with a friend or I don't know if I was on another podcast or some sort of interview. I talked about Where the Wild Things Are and how that book kind of like it's not even this most gloriously written book,
Mhm.
but how that book enters into the story and where you turn the page, it creates an experience for the reader. And I know that that book still speaks to me like in a weird way. Like it is like an experience for me to read it to my kid and to
Mm.
like it was like I was handing down this really incredible experience, not just a story, not just cool pictures, but an experience, because it allows you to get quiet for a minute.
Mhm.
It allows you to like really emphasize this idea that this kid is getting ready to enter this space that you don't even understand, and then it gets all like loud and boisterous, and it's a really wonderful book to kind of read to your kids and to
Mhm.
give like almost like a gift. So
Yeah.
I'll say this. When I started writing children's books, I did not fully appreciate to what degree other people outside of parenting engage children's books. I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of letters specifically about a couple of my books, like When God Made You and When I Pray for You. And one of the letters that I got from When God Made You was from a pastor in Vermont who was also doing some hospice care work on the side. And she walked into a situation where this 99-year-old woman was in her last days, and my book, When God Made You, was sitting on her side table, and the woman patted it. And so the pastor began to read it, and it was she actually ended up reading it 3 times, I think, in the last week of her life to this woman. And I never, like when I was writing it, it never occurred to me that somebody in their last moments here on earth would engage those lyrics and it would be a part of their story.
Mm.
And then on the flip side of that, I've had, I remember parents from Massachusetts wrote me and said they had 3 hours with their baby. Wow, the baby lived for 3 hours. And during that time, they read When God Made You over that baby 3 different times. And again, never in a million years would I have ever imagined that being a book that somebody in their story, that in their scenario, ever would want to read. Like, I'm not sure I'd want to read my book in that kind of moment. And so I do think that there is something about children's books that transcend to different people's stories. I've had people who are single write me and say, I found your book in Target and I literally read it to myself. I read it to myself and just sat there and wept. And then I bought it. And so like, it's one of those things where I don't know, I would have answered that question differently before, prior to like having, received so many letters from people outside of the audience that I assumed would engage my stories. And so it has opened my eyes to the power of a children's book and the fact that all the places that it would go. Like there are places that a children's book will go and be okay and be safe, where other books that are not for children or not about big ideas or not seen as without pictures, that would not be seen as safe or as welcomed. And so that's been a beautiful learning experience for me. I'm sure that other children's books writers would probably answer that differently, because there are some books that I have read out loud that I don't think would be required reading for anybody.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah. So how And so my kids listen to the show, so
Mhm.
I'm asking this question, intending for them to listen, and I guess I'll wonder. And then just Matthew, just a little bit about the show. I record these for me. Every episode is something that I find interesting. I'm happy that other people like to listen, but it's
Yeah.
not really for anybody other than me,
No.
which I guess makes me selfish.
Yeah.
But I
Hey,
learn a
I write
lot.
my books. But you know what? I write my books for myself. So I
Yeah,
get it.
yeah,
To me, it's like if I can speak to my kid, the kid in me, maybe, maybe that will translate
yeah.
to
Yeah.
other people's
So being that
experiences.
you're also a dad and you know that oftentimes your kids don't listen to you because you're just not smart, you just because you're your dad.
I'm an idiot.
How how eh, how does how do you think God sees children? And really that's no different than the way that God sees you and I as non-children.
Yeah.
But I think that we've convinced ourselves that it's different. How does
Yeah.
God actually see children?
I'm going to go back to something that I wrote, that when God sees you, God delights in what is and sees only what's true. That you, yes, you, in all of your glory, bring color and rhythm and rhyme to God's story. So be you, fully you, a show stopping review. Live your life in full color, every tint, every hue. Discover, explore, have faith, but love more, and learn and relearn all that God made you for. And so I think
Mm,
God looks at us and just delights
mm,
in the fact that we are alive, that we, much like, I mean, Seth, when you look at your kid, it's like I told my kid, my youngest kid, on the way to, he's in first grade, in the car ride and the car line as I'm getting ready to drop him off. I told him, I was like, Ezra, I just want you to know, you make every single day of my life better.
mm,
That even on the hardest days that we have, I am blessed that you are in my story, that I get to see, that I have a front row seat to your story. And his eyes get all big, and, and he gives me this big old hug. But I just, like, I just think about how I think about my own kids,
mhm,
and that if God is God is God, then God must have this far bigger abundance of joy that is received than I can even imagine.
mm,
And it's like it's like the first, and in so many situations in our own, in how we were raised, it being introduced to God, we get this really beautiful picture of God, but then we get this really awful picture of us,
mm,
and which really like makes the picture of God very blurry, very hard to see, um, and fully appreciate. And
mm,
I think that as I have, like, in this process of like writing children's books and like reimagining my own perspective of God, and repositioning all of the negative self-talk that I have learned or picked up over the years, and trying to switch that um, to what I believe God would say in my story. Um, there's power and healing and hope and joy, and that's what I want my kids to.
mm.
That's what I want my kids to know. That's what I want my kids to just fully embrace about God's perspective of them.
Mhm.
Like, you. Um, I remember my oldest, when he was 5. We were on our way to swimming lessons, and he asked me, "Hey, Dad, what or Daddy, what is what is the devil?" And and in recovering independent fundamental Baptist form, like, who told you that? I had to have I had to ask, like, what was the context of that conversation? So
Well, it
I
was
mean,
WRE. I was in
yeah.
school.
And of course, like, I mean, you know, many times I have to remind myself that I don't need to instill my own fear
Mhm,
into my children's experiences. But it was a moment. It was very defining because when it comes to the spiritual perspectives of my kids and protecting how they are introduced to ideas, when they are introduced to ideas, when it's like it matters to me.
mm,
And because I think that all of those things are potential shapers of
mm,
their perspectives on themselves
mhm.
and their perspectives on the God I believe created them.
Yeah, I've also had that question, and it was couched in between a question of I forget who it was. It was a year and a half ago, so it was right before my daughter got baptized, um, and my middle daughter, not the
Mhm.
same young daughter that's a pistol. She had couched about the devil, and I remember my answer, and I've since grown that answer into larger conversations for my 13-year-old
Mhm.
because he can. But the answer I gave her, I think, was something to the effect of, "The devil is that thing that allows you to hurt people, and it's something that you have to take some ownership with, and that's
Oh,
why it
that's a
feels bad." That's
yeah.
basically what I told her. And then she didn't answer the question, or didn't follow up, and just said, "Well, you have to be baptized to be saved." To which I was like, okay, and that's like, and I said, "Who? Where is this coming from?" And it was some girl on
Yeah.
the bus or at daycare that had said something, and I was like, "Well, a lot of people believe that.
Yeah.
Most of those people live in America, but I'd like to remind you, my dear, that most of Christians don't live in America, and
Right.
most Christians also don't believe what you just said. But it
Mhm.
doesn't need to be argued about."
Yeah.
And then
And
she's
that's
like, "Yeah, yeah." She's like, "What do you believe?" I'm like, "I believe there are a lot of people in the Bible that were actually baptized in the Holy Spirit before they ever touched water, and
mm,
we can walk through those if you want." So baptism's something different. And then
yeah.
we had a conversation about that. So
And you know what? Those are the kinds of things that where it's like if even if you do believe it, that's as long as you're not projecting those ideas onto somebody else, and making it a requirement. It's the requirement. It's little kids, like my kids have come home and they've had conversations with like 6 and 7 year olds, and these 6 and 7 year olds in their classroom are you know saying, this is how it is, this is what you do, if you don't do this then this happened, like, I mean, and
'cause
it's
that's what my
just
mom and dad said, and they're
yeah,
brilliant.
that's
Yeah.
exactly that's
Yeah.
exactly it.
Yeah.
um and I just you know I teach my kids to value, like, my hope is that I teach my kids to value and celebrate all the different perspectives that people have, on spirituality, whether it is a Christian spirituality or it is an outside of our, the Christianity that we adhere to. And it's I want people to honor their, other people's beliefs, and and respect them, and you know what? I mean, if you, I don't know if you've done much traveling, but like, anytime I travel out the United States, I learn something new about God. Because I meet somebody else whose story is different,
Mm.
and so far outside of my own that their story touches me, their story changes me, and I can't help but believe that I see God in them, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
how that's what I hope to give my kids.
Yeah. So, I want to ask a question, and you can answer it or not answer it because it's not really directly related to this book, but it is kind of related to your first book, um, and then a little bit more current events. So, um, the theology that you're espousing in here, if I have to deconstruct from your writing,
Uh-huh.
is that for some reason we got it wrong and we're not supposed to love people. And I actually am not okay, which sounds like a stupid thing to be deconstructing from in 20 years, as opposed to the books that I'm changing the stories for as I read those to my kids. Um, so, and then you were saying your first one you had to self-publish because they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that. Like, I don't know if that was theological reasons or reasons because of your reputation, or
Yeah.
apparently you said they wanted you to change your name to a woman.
Well, they
Because I
wanted
guess
to
only
change.
women can write children's book.
Well,
I
well,
don't know.
my ex-wife had a much better reputation.
Okay. Okay. So that's very similar mindset to we're not allowed to talk about critical race theory. We're not allowed to talk
Yeah.
about gender issues in schools. We're not allowed. We don't read these books. These books are not allowed to be consumed. And I can see a text like this one for kids not being allowed in many places that it should be allowed in, churches, libraries, because it doesn't necessarily align with um, what the narrative needs to be for power and control. So,
Yeah.
what do we do to counteract the the we're not allowed to talk about these books?
Well, number one, we talk about it. Like we say the things that that other people say are unsayable. Um, and I think that it's like when my kid, my like I to me, empathy, when I can give my kid the gift of empathy, when I can give them the gift of being able to see somebody else's experience and to empathize with, not necessarily knowing exactly how that experience affected that person, but being willing to listen and to show compassion, um, that is when I give that gift to my kids, it allows them to see the world, see their kids, see their friends, see the issues, and they are already far beyond my, like, I would like when I think about all the things that the libraries are trying to, they're trying to take out of the books out of libraries, and I think about all the laws that are being passed in Texas and Florida. Like my kids are so far, like they fully grasp the importance and the danger of those kinds of systems that are being put into place.
Hmm.
They know that there is um, a, a group of people, or lots of people who fight against the goodness that their parents try to give them or try to instill in them. And my goal is to teach my kids to, whatever we do, we are always constantly learning, that we're never going to know every experience. And so whenever you think you've gotten all that, and when you've gotten everything that there is to know about a person's story, that's when you need to stop and start learning more.
Mm.
Because it is that moment when we say, I put a stake in the ground, this is what I know, is when we start to fall behind the conversation, because conversations are constantly evolving, they're constantly moving forward, they're constantly being shifted by other people's experiences. And while we don't necessarily have to wobble with every single story that comes that we hear, we should be empathetic to those stories that change and shift us, and they should have the power to be listened to and heard.
Mm.
And so that's what I tell my kids, um, that every time that listening to other people's stories empowers us to stand and fight. I mean, I've told my kids, I said, there's going to be a time in your life that you're probably going to have to stand up uh, to your friend who has said something that is unkind about somebody else. that you're going to hear. I mean, I've even talked to my kids about like how people perceive me. Like
Mm.
when, there's going to come a time when you're probably going to hear somebody say something negative about your dad being gay. And while that's not your job is not to protect me,
Mhm.
your job is to stand up for all of the LGBTQ people that or
Mhm.
whether the ones that you don't know. And so we talk about those things. We talk about our privilege. We talk about um, our place in society and how we can help move the conversations forward. So how do we counteract those, like the things? I mean, number one, we give our kids a different story. Like
Mm.
I know people ask all the time, well, how do you fix what is broken about modern evangelicalism? I'm like, the biggest thing that we can do is give our kids a different God story. Like
Mhm.
give our kids something new, something fresh, something that is not built on this white male perspective that has been instilled in us since we were very, very little, and without us even knowing.
Mhm.
Give our kids a different perspective, give our kids a different story. And so like even so whether it is combating evangelicalism or combating like people wanting to uh, take books out of the library, it is we have to give them a different story and empower that and empower our kids to think differently, because we're all subject to the things that, I mean, I was raised in a situation where information was controlled to an nth degree. Like it was like I was raised in a where I wasn't allowed to watch certain like most of television I wasn't allowed to watch. If anything, we weren't allowed to go to movie theaters and
Mm.
see a movie. And it was anything that was beyond outside of PG, we would never even have a chance. But even if it was PG, my parents would watch it closely, and if anything would like come up that would be outside the thing. So I grew up in a very sheltered experience, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, like the worst thing that people can do if they really want to control the conversation is actually try to control the conversation. Like it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It like you don't. It almost always does the opposite,
Mm.
because um, words are pretty powerful things that always find a way
Yeah.
to get read and get heard, and people to experience. And so I I know that was a very long like like a very mixed up answer, and I'm not
Yeah.
even sure I answered it fully, but I'll shut up. That's what I'll
No,
say.
no, it's fine. No, yeah, I could paraphrase it. You did answer the question.
uh,
Yeah, I'm not gonna paraphrase it. You can just rewind it. You
yeah,
can listen
don't.
to it again
No,
if
I
you're
don't necessarily want to. Like that was a lot. Like I got in
um,
there. I got
so
myself into a corner a little bit. So
I do, but you're not wrong. It's not the wrong corner to be in. And I will say, as I've done some counseling with my son, I have not done the counseling, but counseling in the family requires everybody to do some work. It's
sure.
not, which is something I had to learn. I don't know if I've ever said that on the show.
Hmm.
Well, I'm not editing it out. I'm too lazy. Um, so it's going to stay there. Um, the more I try to be restrictive, and that's my personality, the worse things get. And the less controlling I tried to be, there's still there's still screw ups, but they're way less frequent, and when they happen, they're also way less over the top. Which isn't the same as controlling words,
Yeah.
but control is control. It doesn't really matter what
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
controlling.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's like when it comes to uh, the topic of sex and sexuality, I there's a lot of fear as a parent about information. And now my ex-wife, like, she had a completely different experience growing up. Her parents talked about sex very openly in a very, like, adult way from an early age. And so we've kind of like embraced her
Mhm.
way of doing things. And there's been times, because of how I was raised, it triggers fear. It triggers like,
Mhm.
just this, what am I giving my kids? Am I like, what permissions am I giving them by giving them information? And so far, it has given them a healthy perspective about
Mhm.
sex that I didn't have at 17, let alone at 13, let
Mm.
alone at 11.
Yeah.
My daughter understands LGBTQ plus stories better than I do, because she's read a lot of books, and she's engaged in a lot of conversations in her school's discussion. And so
Yeah.
you like, I have learned that, like you said, this need for us to control, is usually, for me anyway, it's this fear that is triggered in me because of my childhood.
Mhm.
And it because of all the things that my church and my environment tried to control, and not allow me to engage. And it didn't work for me, and it's not going to work for my kids. And I'd rather empower them with information than to limit
Yeah.
their perspectives.
Yeah, I have two final questions. One of them is absolutely ridiculous, and there's no way to
Okay.
segue into it. And the other I ask every single guest. And so that one's easy. So the ridiculous question is this, and I want to ask it because I don't talk to people that rhyme very often.
Yeah.
The last one being Propaganda, I think, was probably that. But I mean,
Oh,
he writes his
awesome.
own. He writes his own music.
Yeah.
I love his stuff. Love what he does.
Uh-huh.
I have to think that you have seen on YouTube people rapping children books besides like Ludacris. So if you know with Llama Llama Red Pajama, which for those listening, I will link it in the transcript because I transcribe these. If you haven't seen that version of that book, that is the only way now to read Llama Llama. Have you seen the Ludacris version?
I do not think I've
Do you know
seen
who
that.
Ludacris is?
Of
Yes.
course. Yeah.
Yeah. So I forget the beat, but he's at some radio station out in LA and they've made this their shtick. They'll give you a children's book and they'll drop a beat and you'll be
Yeah.
like, and so I'm not even gonna try to do Ludacris. You're just gonna have
Yeah.
to Google it. It's like a minute and a half long. It's not long, but it is fantastic.
Uh,
So if someone was rapping the words to this book, what is the background rap music that they're playing there? Like, what's the song that you're like,
oh
yeah,
God,
this
dude,
embraces these words?
I have no idea. I was just gonna say though, there is a rap version of one of my books on YouTube somewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is actually a thing. I'm sure you could probably search it and find it, but it's When God Made You, I'm pretty sure. And
I
it's
will.
so it's and I think that I would probably want the background music to be something different. I but I will say this. If my one of my books were to inspire somebody's somebody's story to and they would like want to turn it into a rap song, I mean, that's a pretty cool thing. So I'm not opposed to it, but I certainly would not want to be in charge of the background.
Yeah. Yeah.
I-
One of the most recent ones
no.
I watched was one of the Dr. Seuss books. I can't remember what it was. I think it was Hop on Socks or Fox with Socks or whatever that book is
Yeah.
called. And I think the backing track was Forgot About Dre. And so it was just the beat to Forgot About Dre with him rapping that on there. And
Oh,
it
well
was
then if we're
amazing.
gonna do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That's what I'm asking. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like what's that music that, when you hear it, you're like, that's my jam. And that's what's in these words right here. This.
Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna say probably something by TLC, but I'm not sure it would be that. It wouldn't be like necessarily this is the book, but like I was gonna say Creep, but I guess if you when you said that second part, I was like, well, maybe not.
Well, just the Left Eye
just like
Lopez
the just
version.
like
Yeah.
the vibe,
Yeah.
the that
Yeah.
it's
No, that's a good vibe.
promotes.
That's a
Yeah,
good vibe. Anyway, I told you
yeah.
ridiculous question.
It's okay. It's
I've
okay.
looked.
I like
I only
I wish
scripted that.
more people would ask questions like that. Those are fun.
I script very few questions for these because the first year was just a robotic version of me that they didn't sound like conversations.
Yeah.
And so I usually write down one question. That was the one that I wrote down for you. That is the question. Besides the ones that I promised my daughters that I would ask
That's
and whatnot.
amazing. I love it.
Yeah, it's just that's the way I like to roll. So when you try to wrap words around whatever God is or the divine is or whatever that is, what are those words?
Wow. There was a TV show called Justified, and there was a scene where a woman was in her final moments before her passing, and in those moments she quietly said, it's time for me to go and experience the mystery. And I think that God is the mystery. God is the and so because I think that a mystery is something that we're constantly wanting to engage, and yet we're intrigued by it. We're moved by it. Like, and so like for me, the word mystery is a pretty all-encompassing word to like how I think about God and all the time, because it keeps me just engaging the story. I mean, I could come up with like, big, awesome, good, but like I love this idea of engaging. I mean, I think about that line the line that she said so like quite often, because it's like it's time for me to go and experience the mystery, and I think about that in my own life like on a daily basis as like it's time for me to go engage the mystery.
Mm, no, that's good. That's good. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I
Thank you so
genuinely
much for
had a
having
good
me.
time. Yeah. Thanks for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Let me